Chapter 370, Karma and Fate. The burst of spiritual light scattered in Li Wanju's mind into countless tiny runes that revolved around his head, containing none other than the Great Development Technique. Li Wanju's entire body instantly stiffened, and before long, his eyes rolled over into the back of his head as he fell unconscious and collapsed to the ground. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of spiritual light that picked up Li Wanju before carrying him into the dilapidated temple. It seems you and I were fated to meet here, and I'm temporarily borrowing the body of your master, so I'll give you this great development technique as compensation. Han Li said in an indifferent voice before preparing to fly away. However, a hint of surprise then appeared on his face, and he discovered upon a closer inspection that Li Wanju also possessed a remarkable spirit physique, except it hadn't yet been awakened. Following a closer examination, a hint of intrigue arose in Han Li's eyes, and he swept his sleeve through the air once again to send another streak of spiritual light flying into Li Wanju's body. So be it. It's not every day that I get to meet someone so similar to myself, so I'll give you a bit more assistance. The streak of spiritual light split up into two in Li Wanju's mind, and one of them exploded into countless tiny runes that depicted another cultivation art, namely heaven-bearing devil arts. 2. This cultivation art was something that Han Li had obtained from Manhuzi, and at the time, he had promised to find Manhuzi a disciple so that the heaven-bearing devil arts wouldn't be lost. But he had never been able to find a suitable candidate. On top of that, he had been busy preparing for a deity transformation stage breakthrough at the time, so he had set the matter aside, and even now, he still hadn't fulfilled that promise. As it turned out, Li Wanju's spirit physique was perfect for the heaven-bearing devil arts. As for the other streak of spiritual light, it shrank down into a tiny speck of light and hid itself in a corner of Li Wanju's mind. That speck of light contained another cultivation art that came from the same origins as the Provenance True Devil Arts and the Heaven-Bearing Devil Arts. However, the seal on it would only be undone once Li Wanju reached the deity transformation stage someday. However, the path of cultivation was always one that was fraught with peril and unpredictability, so the chances of Li Wanju reaching the deity transformation stage before his lifespan ran out were slim to none, even with the assistance of the two cultivation arts, and his mediocre aptitude certainly wasn't going to help his cause. But Han Li had already done everything that he could for the boy. He hadn't intended to offer the boy any assistance, but he couldn't help but be moved by Li Wanju's devotion to his master. With that in mind, Han Li heaved an internal sigh, shaking his head as he directed his gaze away from Li Wanju. Han Li cast his gaze into the distance, then made a hand seal as he released his enormous spiritual sense over the surrounding area once again. All of the world's origin chi in a radius of several dozen kilometers instantly converged to form a white cloud. This was a secret technique that he had previously learned, allowing him to forcibly draw upon the world's origin chi with his spiritual sense. This secret technique was very taxing on one's spiritual sense, but this body possessed far too little magic power, and Ling Yunzi wasn't carrying any storage tools either, presumably having lost them during the prior battle. So if he didn't use this secret technique, then he wouldn't even be able to fly. Han Li drifted up into the air before landing on the cloud, and the white cloud churned slightly before hurtling away at an incredible speed as a streak of white light. The matters concerning Li Wanju were largely inconsequential. What was important for him was to find out as much about this place as he could, as there had to have been some reason that he had ended up here. With that in mind, he began to scour the surrounding area with both his eyes and his spiritual sense. But after flying for a while, he discovered that the entire area was completely mundane and unremarkable. He cast his gaze to the left, where the mantra treasured axis projection remained hovering by his side, and at this point, close to half of the time Dao runes on its surface had already faded. His brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he made a hand seal, upon which the white cloud beneath him accelerated significantly. A short while later, he suddenly stopped in his tracks, then cast his gaze toward an obscure valley down below. On a mountain face, Deep within the valley was a giant purple flower the size of a millstone. Its petals were extremely large and thick, and they were of a very vibrant reddish-purple color. There were also some red feelers among the flower petals, at the top of which were a series of fist-sized water droplets that were giving off a sweet and fragrant aroma. Hanli descended in front of the giant purple flower atop his white cloud, and an intrigued look appeared on his face. This flower was clearly a spirit plant, and the aura that it was giving off was very similar to that of the blood crystal lotus root. The purple flower was swaying gently in the wind, and Hanli hesitated momentarily before flicking a finger through the air, sending a gust of fierce wind sweeping toward the flower. The giant purple flower shuddered, and all of its feelers instantly shot forth like lightning, elongating significantly before intertwining to form a large net that descended upon Hanli. Of course, Hanli wasn't going to fall prey to something like this, and his white cloud shot back like lightning to evade the flower's feelers. The feelers waved around in the air, while the flower's petals began moving like a giant mouth, producing a faint screeching sound that expressed its rage and frustration. After thrashing around for a while, the feelers quickly shrank back down to their original length, while the purple flower petals also stopped moving. Hanli raised an eyebrow upon seeing this, and a contemplative look appeared in his eyes. The flower was indeed quite a remarkable spirit plant, but there was nothing else particularly special about it. Thus he promptly departed, flying out of the valley before continuing onward. As he did so, he was surprised to discover more and more of those giant purple flowers appearing in the mountain range, but none of them were being picked. He was rather perplexed by this, but he didn't stop to investigate. Instead, he continued to make more hand seals to further accelerate the speed of his flight. Judging from the number of time Dao runes that remained lit on his mantra-treasured axis, he didn't have much time left. After flying for a while longer, a look of surprise and elation suddenly appeared on Hanli's face, and he quickly drew to a halt in front of a call. Within the call was a cluster of buildings, and there were many restrictions that were flashing with spiritual light set up in the area. There were also some streaks of light flying through the air, and this was a sect. From Ling Yunzi's memories, Hanli learned that this was none other than the Iron Beast sect. He quickly began to chant an incantation while making a hand seal, and his spiritual sense surged out of his body, forming a series of invisible ripples around him. All of the surrounding world's origin chi also converged to form a layer of transparent spiritual light around him, following which he quickly descended onto a plaza in the sect. He continued to search through Ling Yunzi's memories while casting his gaze toward a mountain to his right, and atop that mountain stood an azure pavilion which had the brightest of all restrictions in the sect around it. This was the Iron Beast sect's scripture library, and it contained all types of cultivation arts and scriptures. Hanli flew toward the pavilion before quickly descending in front of it, but his brows furrowed slightly at the sight of the restriction around the building. The restriction wasn't particularly advanced, and under normal circumstances, he would have been able to bypass or remove it with ease. However, the magic power in this body was simply far too lackluster, and his immense spiritual sense wasn't going to help him much when it came to bypassing restrictions. Right at this moment, a streak of light arrived from afar, descending in front of the scripture library as well. The streak of light then faded to reveal a middle-aged man who was the early core formation stage, and there was a look of haughtiness and arrogance about him. Before Hanli even had a chance to take a closer look, his body abruptly shuddered, and an overwhelming sense of fury and resentment welled up in his heart. This man was the very same person who had severely wounded Ling Yunzi not long ago. Even though Ling Yunzi had already perished, what remained of his will in this body still harbored intense resentment toward this man. Don't worry, I've been using your body, so I'm naturally obliged to fulfill some of your wishes. Hanli mused internally as he cast a cold gaze toward the middle-aged man. All of a sudden, the man shuddered as a chill ran down his spine, and he hurriedly looked around, but was unable to find anything. He then swept his spiritual sense through the area several times, but to no avail. Once again. "What the hell?" he murmured to himself with tightly furrowed brows, then raised a hand to release an azure talisman into the restriction. At the same time, he demanded in an arrogant voice, "Open the restriction. I've come here to retrieve something under orders from the sect master." A gray-robed elderly man appeared within the restriction, and a hint of disdain flashed through his eyes. But he then quickly put on a warm smile as he said, "Please wait a moment. I'll open the restriction for you right away. Administrator Wang." He pulled out a badge as he spoke, and a burst of light shot out of the badge, upon which an opening appeared in the restriction. "Can you not have done that a little faster? How slow can you be?" The middle-aged man harumphed coldly before flying into the scripture library without even sparing a glance at the gray-robed elderly man. The gray-robed elderly man's expression darkened slightly as he swept his badge through the air, and the opening on the restrictions was instantly sealed. However, what they had failed to notice was that a transparent figure had also flown into the scripture library in the instant right before the opening was sealed. 1. For more information on the Great Development Technique, please refer to Chapter 232, Great Development Technique. 2. For more information on the Heaven-Bearing Devil Arts, please refer to RMJI Chapter 457, Heaven-Bearing Devil Arts. So 3. For more information on Manhuzi, please refer to Wiki Manhuzi.